What is the value of a human life? And I actually want an answer to that question. Uncountable? We don't want to put a dollar amount on it? There is a guy who has to do that. Every time there's like a big tragedy and they collect a bunch of money, this guy is like the expert at trying to figure out how much is a death worth versus like a lifelong injury or something you recover from. But what I hear you all saying is it's priceless. There's not a price we can put on a human life. Today's gospel story, we enter with Jesus on a journey, and he asks the disciples, who do people say that I am? And ultimately they get around to Peter saying, you are the Messiah. So everything that follows in this conversation that Jesus is having is grounded for us in this narrative where we understand that Jesus is the Messiah sent by God to reconcile the whole creation to God. So then he continues to talk to them. And he starts to tell them that he has to go through great suffering and death. And at that point, he also talks about rising again, but I don't think Peter heard that bit. And he starts to rebuke Jesus, and then Jesus has to tell Peter, get behind me, Satan. And then he calls the crowd together with the disciples and starts to talk to them about losing their lives to save it, picking up their own crosses and following him. And all of this then follows, right, this idea that Jesus is the Messiah, that he has to suffer and die. And in the midst of that conversation, he says to them, what can they give in exchange for their life? What can they give in return for their life? And that's really kind of the same question as what is the value of a human life? And you all are saying that it's priceless. And so can we afford priceless? No. So Jesus is kind of asking a rhetorical question. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. I've changed some details and some names so as not to implicate anyone. But the bits of them that are kind of the truth of them are there. We'll start with a guy I'm going to call Ken. Ken grew up in a great suburban neighborhood with his parents and his older brother and sister. Got into high school and wasn't really a strong student. Not for lack of aptitude, but more for lack of really caring. And so he got a job, he worked all the way through high school, but he also developed several habits. One was smoking, one was drinking, and then the third one was drugs. So if we fast forward from high school to his early 30s, Ken now has 2 kids through one woman who he is no longer with, and she has to fight him very hard just to get any kind of child support out of him. He has a 3rd child with his wife, who he lives with, and that child gets to experience his continued relationship with drugs and alcohol on a fairly regular basis. He does have a job that pays pretty well, but it's the job he has to work at keeping because he also has a felony on his record from his early 20s that grew out of those same habits that he had developed. So we'll take Ken for a minute and set him over here. And now I want to talk about Penny. Penny did not grow up in quite as nice a neighborhood. Her parents divorced when she was a teenager, which put the brakes on all of her dreams that she had in terms of things that she wanted to do. She ended up working very hard in school to get scholarships, some. She worked all the way through school, but still had student loans. And so when she graduated college, she went into one of those programs where you can like teach in a poor public school, but get student loan forgiveness. So she did all of that. Then got a job in the corporate world. Didn't work so well for her, so she started working in not-for-profit. And by her early 30s, you could find easily 100 people who could say, she changed my life because of the work that she did through, whether it was the teaching or working in the not-for-profit that she did. So I ask you now, do we value Ken and Penny's lives the same way? Not really, do we? So with our heads, we will say that a human life is priceless, but then kind of with our hearts, we really don't think that. In the ways that we behave and act toward other people. We do put a different value on different people's lives. If a homeless person isn't known by anyone and no one knows their name, when they die, they call them Jane Doe or John Doe, and they get like an anonymous burial. And then if a statesperson dies, we invite all the world leaders to come and celebrate their life. We clearly do not put the same amount of value on those lives. Now, in our day-to-day lives, this can express itself in ways that aren't great. It's where we can be judgmental about the choices other people make. It can get to the places where we dismiss other people or call them names or whatever it is that we can do on sort of a local level that indicates that we don't value everyone the same way. But it also can get dangerous. Going back to September 11th, which we remembered this week, and going forward, I have had so many few conversations with people who will say, it's better to fight the war over there than over here. Now, I get that, but fighting the war over there for us has meant dropping bombs from drones that sometimes kill women and children who didn't really have anything to do with the person we were trying to kill. And we collectively have decided that that's okay because at least it keeps our lives safe. Which means that in some way we think our lives are more valuable than the lives of other people. So we say with our heads that they're priceless, but the ways that we choose to behave collectively is to assume that ours are more valuable. Now that's not a uniquely American thing, right? If you go throughout history, you'll find that everybody thinks their life is more valuable than someone else's. But that tells you that we think they have a value, and that it's not necessarily the same value for everyone. And so as we go through life, as we look at other people and we make these judgments, that's not just an external thing that we do, because it also grows out of how we feel about ourselves. If we think that other people's value is defined by the good they did or the good that they didn't do, then we probably think that our value is defined in the same way. I've had conversations with people in the hospital who will look at me and say, I can't do anything anymore. They lose a sense of value because they're in a hospital bed and they can't go do anything. I watched one guy retire like 4 times. He'd retire, and then he wouldn't see any value because he wasn't working at something, so then he would go get another job, and then figure out that that's why he retired, so he would retire again, but then he couldn't stay retired because he had no sense of value other than the things that he was producing in the world. And when we get to that place, it's not just about how we feel about ourselves, but it pretty soon becomes how we think God looks at us. Because if other people have value or not based on what they do, and I have value or not based on what I do, and if I'm not doing enough good in the world, then how could God even love me for who I am? And all of you can, I'm sure, think back to any number of conversations you've had with people when someone dies. And we as Lutherans would say we're saved by grace through faith. There's nothing we can do to earn that. It is a gift from God. But then we'll turn around when someone dies and go, oh, well, they're in heaven because they were a good person. Right? And we have those conversations because deep down somehow we don't think that a human life is priceless and that everybody's value is equal. And when we get into that place, then we begin to work and work and work and fail and fail and fail at being the kind of good people that we think God is okay with. If I told you today that Buckingham Palace was going to be for sale with all of the crown jewels and all of the artwork and all this stuff, that would pretty well be priceless, right? Would any of you start saving up for that? No, because it's ridiculous. You know you can't pay it. But when you talk about this gift of life that Jesus gives us, and this whole Bible text we heard today is set within death and resurrection. Peter says you're the Messiah. Jesus says don't tell anybody. And then he starts to talk about death, suffering, and resurrection. So he says the whole conversation is in the bounds of the gift of life that Jesus gives us on the cross. And in the resurrection that brings us this new life. The whole conversation was in those bounds. It was then that he asked this question, what can you give in return for your life? And we, with our heads, say it's priceless. And then with our bodies and our being, we start trying to save up for it. And that makes no sense. But what Jesus has really given us is a gift to be freed from all of that. The fact that it starts with, yes, you are the Messiah, and then goes to this place of death and resurrection, frees us from having to earn the life that Jesus has already given to us. We don't have to earn it. It is ours. It is this gift of life that he has given us. And yet, when we get to those places where we think that we have to earn it, we think you have to try to be a good person, then you get stuck in this place where you can't quite get that God loves you for just who you are. Now, does this mean that doing good work is unimportant? Of course not, because the good work we do impacts other people's lives, and this is where it gets really important. We've got Maya with us today from Haiti, and he told a story in between services about when this place called Wings of Hope was created. It's a home for disabled kids. And when Maya and the St. Joseph's family he lived with went to visit this place, the person that ran it told them that this one disabled child was basically like a piece of living furniture. That is a profound statement about a human life that has, in this person's eyes, no value. Well, Maya and his colleagues, who were just kids at the time, went and taught this kid that he wasn't just a little piece of furniture, right? So that good work that they did wasn't to get good with God. They knew they were good with God. They knew that God had brought them from places where they had not had value to see that they were valuable people because they were beloved children of God. And then they went to share that with somebody else. So there's this part of this text that talks about taking up your cross and following Jesus. And sometimes we can flip it the other way around and not be worried about good works, but start to thinking that our suffering is somehow the thing that saves us. And you can hear people talk about, oh, that's the cross I bear. Oh, this is the burden that we carry. And we start to try to turn that then into the work that makes us good with God. Right? So we can maybe not do the good stuff, but we can at least suffer well. And if we suffer well, God will love us. But Jesus didn't say, you all have to suffer so that I can save the world. He said, I have to suffer and die so that I can be raised. And then comes that gift of life. So every time I hear this story, I think back to when I was an intern and I heard Pastor Doug Hill at Mighty Hope Lutheran Church preach on this text. And he said, maybe the cross we pick up isn't some big burden, some heavy suffering thing, but maybe it's the cross that we get marked with in baptism. That is the cross we pick up and carry. And if you think about that, baptism is about our identity as children of God. And Luther tells us we should wake up every day and remind ourselves of these baptisms. So to pick that cross up and carry it isn't without suffering, right? Being a person of faith doesn't exempt us from suffering. It isn't without an earthly death, but it does invite us into a journey of compassion, a journey of forgiveness, a journey of mercy, a journey where we go out into the world knowing that every single person has value because we know that in our heads. We know that the life is priceless, but we also know that we can't afford it. So the good work that we do is really the good that we were created to do. God created us to be amazing, wonderful people that have an impact on other people's lives for the good. And when we do that, it's not because we're trying to get to Jesus. It's because Jesus has already got to us and equips us to go out and change people's lives so that they, when they don't know they have value, when they're working really hard to try to be loved, we can just show up and let them know they are loved just because they are. And that is this gift of grace we have been given to carry, and we will carry it well, not because we're good at it, but because Jesus is. Amen.